On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Shweta Saraf. She's the head of engineering at Edge Infrastructure Services at Equinix. We're going to be talking about hiring for a niche skill set, and Shweta will kind of go through who she hires for. But it's going to be, I think, a great episode. We're going to be talking about optimizing the talent pipeline and one of the key components of removing hiring friction. And I think we're going to have a great show. Shweta, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, Amir. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Let's start off two things. One, tell us what your company does, and then also head of engineering at Edge Infrastructure Services. What are you responsible for?
Thank you. So I'll start off with the company. Equinix is world's digital infrastructure company, which means that basically we are building the digital platform to deliver infrastructure at a software speed, right? Equinix has 260 plus data centers all over the world, and more than 95% of public internet traffic goes through these data centers. So we are really on a mission to make it accessible and cloudy for all of our customers as we build. So in my role as head of engineering for Edge Infrastructure Services, I'm responsible for two of the fastest growing products at Equinix. One is Equinix Metal, which is the bare metal cloud where you can get on-demand servers at your fingertips and a whole lot of, partner ecosystem access along with it. The other product is Network Edge, which is essentially a VNF cloud offering where you can spin up a virtual router, SD-WAN instance, and connect to your workloads in the cloud. So my teams are responsible from the entire life cycle of when a user signs up for an account, goes to the portal, access an API, all the way to when they provision a server or a virtual machine and do network configurations. At the end of the month, they get a bill for the same, right? So the entire life cycle of what goes into building, architecting, and operating these clouds for our customers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think when we were talking about what to cover on this episode, I think I went to your LinkedIn and I pulled out a specific item on your details, and I think you mentioned something about millions of API requests for the bare metal cloud serving a large demographic, and I was asking you about. Doesn't seem to be a common skill set to hire for, and we started talking about how niche maybe your skill set is. Maybe let's start there because I just want I think I had the context of talking to you and understanding like what does that niche hiring look like for you, but your team in terms of skill sets, what is that made up of? What does it look like?
Yeah, great question. So I have a globally distributed team, and I see engineers who have various skill sets, right, who are part of making this team successful. So someone who is an expert in hardware system engineering, who understands OSs, firmware, and who can do open BMC kind of work, all the way to folks who are really good at writing highly scalable distributed systems code, which runs into these multiple locations across the world, right, and scales at a rapid pace, to platform DevOps engineers who really invest in building our Kubernetes platform, which is homegrown, operating it at scale, and then really adding the tool chain or the system that developers use to be successful, whether it's logging, observability, or any kind of RPM, right? So those are some of the skill sets. And then on product engineering side, a lot of generalists kind of skill set where you need to understand what writing good code means, how can you test it in production with feature flags at a rapid scale, and also bringing in skills where you are able to write the front-end experience of it and React and design the experience using your UX skills, as well as writing the business logic or API that can scale with it.
So it sounds like you hire for a lot of different people. That becomes tricky, obviously, as you're looking to scale your team. And you mentioned you have some more general skill, React development and whatnot. I think those are some skills that are already defined, and then obviously you mentioned some roles that are a little bit more nuanced to your team in particular. I guess when you look at those roles, right, the roles that are maybe, hey, these skill sets are native to, let's say, Equinix. It's not something that's readily available in terms of the context, maybe, right? So maybe somebody has written APIs, obviously Go, that's not new, but doing it in the context of what you're looking for at the scale you're looking at is a little bit different. I guess when you look at that and you're looking at hiring, how do you approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amir. So to give you that answer, I want to tell you a little bit of a story of how this team has become what it is today, right?
Sure.
So about 3 years back, there was a company called Packet, which did bare metal cloud. And essentially Packet was acquired by Equinix. And that's how the foundation of this team started, which was about 30, 40 engineers, right? So at that point in time, everybody was wearing multiple hats. Everyone was learning on the job. And we also had some single points of failures. But from that point on, we invested a lot intentionally to build more of platforms, whether it was the Kubernetes platform, the billing platform, the network platform, and also have the mindset of declarative APIs and self-serve capability and how to enable people to use these platforms, whether they are internal customers or external customers, right? So that was the transformation that we went through in terms of how our engineering evolved, how we scaled, and what kind of people we got in. But again, in terms of the niche skill set, you're right. I mean, there is not too many people who are doing this kind of work or who enjoy doing this kind of work, let alone being able to find them, hire them, and have them challenged and keep them happy at this place. So for me, I feel like hiring is a big part of my role. So it is for all the hiring managers that we have, because it is key for us that we are really bringing in people who are feeling connected to this mission of delivering physical infrastructure at a software speed and going the route of building the community, building the ecosystem, and putting ourselves in the shoes of the practitioners, right? Because our customers are not just traditional network operators or telco operators anymore. They are engineers just like us in other companies who want to have cloud-like deployments, cloud-like experience, even when they are dealing with a data center or a bare metal server that is situated in the cloud. Combined with that, we also see a lot of need to interconnect between different businesses. And that's where the skill sets of like traditional network engineer, which was more vendor based or vendor motivated, is shifting to more of a new way of doing it, where everything is API driven, everyone is coding. It's not just understanding the network configurations on the switches, but how to program it, how to make it self-sufficient and vendor agnostic. So in that sense, I feel like it is definitely a challenge for us to keep adding great talent to this team. But also once we have someone join in, they absolutely feel like they are learning a lot. They are contributing what they bring to the table and together amplifying and creating that multiplier effect, right? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think, everything's become a form of software engineering. There's very little, in terms of being able to avoid it, whether you're a system network person, you moved into DevOps or SRE roles, you need some of that basic software engineering skill set. You don't have to be obviously a software developer, but you need that baseline. And I guess when you look at some of the roles on your team, and you mentioned, obviously the growth of needing engineering skills, how is that complicated? Scaling, right? So I mean, you guys are growing. You're obviously the team's products growing, adoption, all that kind of stuff. I mean, the team's going to scale. When you're looking some of those, I guess friction type requirements where hey, it's not readily available on the market, or somebody's done it, but the context is different. Like it's not 100% transferable to what you guys are doing because of the scale or maybe just the nuance. I mean, how does the team work with that?
Yeah, that's another great segue into it, right? So I think thinking about the friction points or transferable skills or our approach to how to do this, right? I want to start out by talking a little bit about hiring because, again, when you are scaling at this level of scale and changing wheels while the car is already in the motion, so to speak, it is important that you find people who are willing and who are able to hit the ground running, right? Versus have notions of this is how I did it in my previous role and this is what I want to do. So while the skills and the niche of experience is important, the attitude is very key for somebody to succeed and be like a sponge and absorb things and contribute versus get stuck into those mental models. So that's one thing. But other thing that we do is we also encourage a lot of our existing staff to find those horizontally challenging opportunities like you were talking about, or for our senior members of the team, they're very committed to growing engineers from within and pair programming or helping them develop skills that they may not be aware are key for succeeding in this environment. So there's a lot of internal investment to grow talent that we already have. And then lastly, it is about when hiring as well, like keeping an open mind. Like we may need like 10 things that are critical for somebody to be succeeding, but we also look at the makeup of the team, right? There might be other people on the team who have strengths in those areas. So it is not an exercise of checking the box on every single skill, but also figuring out what are the 2 or 3 critical things that this person needs and which ones of those they have the aptitude to go learn with a good support system or a team. So that's how we have been able to scale, but also carefully investing in areas like security, network, platform, or billing. Like whenever we needed that subject matter expertise, we have also gone out and hired for it, knowing that it might be a very big jump to grow someone internally in a domain that is so critical.
Absolutely. And you mentioned obviously, you guys are giving opportunity to staff to grow skill sets. You're hiring for a specific skill set. You'd like to have certain aptitudes. It sounds like when you're partnering with the talent team, it sounds obviously, from the engineering perspective, it's one thing to narrow these things down. Obviously, you have to communicate that and make sure the pipeline is being, managed so that it's got the optimal type of candidate. But obviously, as you get more vague with the requirements, or not vague, but as you have more flexibility in the check boxes, the pool can get wider as well, which is good in some ways, also bad in some ways. When you're looking at optimizing the talent pipeline and being careful not to reduce too many check boxes, meaning the hard requirements, but still looking for like that aptitude and skill set. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so a few ways we do it is partnering with our talent team, like treating them as partners from the first step of this journey, right? And not just saying that you're going to come in and out. We always continue building the pipeline, even if we are like in phase of rapid growth or we are just holding still and consolidating. So with that in mind, the things we do is we actually sit together and look at resumes or LinkedIn profiles for the candidates that could fit this kind of role, right? And we talk through the thought process of what is the hiring manager really looking for, because it may look very different when somebody else is trying to zero down on keywords or the check boxes that you talked about. But once we do that exercise and also establish what are we aiming for, but what we don't want at the same time, then the talent team gets a good handle of what are those absolute check boxes where we don't want to wean the talent pool to be so broad that we're not able to hire for who we really want versus waste cycles, right? Then we also watch the metrics in terms of how long, like one of the friction points was how long it took to deliver an offer to a candidate. And we realized there were things that were totally in our control that we could do to optimize that experience. So keeping the candidate experience top of mind. And we have some areas where we are good, some areas where we need to learn. But at the end of the day, treating hiring as a hustle and not taking talent for granted, because especially in this environment, people are obviously looking, but also they have a lot of options. So what is that you offer in terms of value for someone joining in, whether it's an opportunity to build something which scales to such a big footprint and do it from scratch while we are on the growth path, or whether it is the culture which is inclusive and allows people to learn and to fail and experiment and learn from it and keep growing from it, right? So we try to hone in on those aspects. Yeah, so those are some of the ways. And then we also have like a panel of engineers who sit on the interview process, right? And they help us sort of hone this in as well, because as they talk to few candidates, they come back, we do debriefs, and we sort of course correct in terms of, okay, this team already has the skill set in Golang, they know the software engineering skills, they lack an operational skill set in the team as a whole. So how do we optimize for that and pivot there?
Absolutely. And I think, I guess to kind of maybe bring the training component back in, because you mentioned obviously the opportunity to train from within, give engineers a chance to grow their skill sets, especially if there are areas they can move into. As you guys are kind of forecasting your growth and seeing, internal people upskill and be able to be more productive in different areas, how do you balance the forecast, the headcount need versus potentially people who are upskilling? Because obviously, I know you guys are scaling, hiring is good, but there's obviously need to be some balance of making sure that you're watching the internal people versus, the headcount that's coming in from outside.
Yes. So we have done that. We've actually encouraged some of our senior people to go spread the knowledge they have to different parts of the engineering fold, right? And the outcomes have been very positive because they have been able to amplify the kind of culture / the domain expertise which is needed for the whole company, not just for my team, for example, right? So one of those examples is resilience engineering. Like we formed a team of SREs, which were focused on very much like adaptive resilience engineering kind of work, which would pair with different teams versus be embedded or like do the day to day. So that kind of approach really helped us scale in the early days. And in order for us to make those decisions as to when do we give people an opportunity to be challenged and grow versus when do we need to hit the results, right? Like we take into account the business priorities and like treating it as one goal, one team. So like as a business, if business wants us to move faster in digital services and deliver on a certain goals by end of the next year, then we pragmatically look at like what is the need for us to go build a team which will make this happen versus who they report into and things like that, right? So that's the first step. And then the second step is as a leader, I always look at like, okay, is the team balanced? Like, is there equal value in having some young to career folks or people from non-traditional backgrounds where there is appetite for learning and we can invest, but then when the balance is off, then obviously it's time to sort of focus on doubling down and making sure we are getting a senior person who is an expert and does that. So again, it's not one size fits all kind of formula, but it starts with one goal, leadership support to allow these kind of changes without it becoming a territorial concern of this is my best player and I'm not going to be able to part ways with them. Like really that having that openness has encouraged people to stay longer at the company and enjoy the work they are doing and feel like they are part of the growth.
I mean, that's actually really critical. Obviously, you having that opportunity to grow your skill set without leaving, that's a massive advantage. Otherwise, you're having to backfill, which is unfortunate, and you're losing a lot of the built-in IP into that person. But I guess I was just kind of curious. You mentioned early on about how wide your team is. I mean, you have React developers, you have DevOps, platform, API development. You have a lot of different things that happen. I guess if you were to maybe think about your role and its evolution from, where it was, focus on, you mentioned, I know early on in your career, you were more director of engineering on the networking side. That was a little bit more where you're focused on. Now you're a wider software engineering leader. How does that, is there any challenge in terms of being wider in terms of hiring and growing teams that are broader like that?
Yeah, definitely. So, I spent almost a decade in networking and storage technologies, right? So, when you are having the depth of what you're doing, you kind of also build a network. So, like when you go from one place to another place, it's also about like who's going to follow you, right? And that doesn't mean like literally they drop their jobs and follow you, but like that activating that network effect in terms of like who are the people that you're looking at, right? Apart from just your traditional pipelines that you build, but really people who you can convince to come in and be part of this mission because you're able to convey a clear vision, you're able to reach beyond your predicted circles. So for me, it was a growth as a my own leadership journey in the sense that I went from being really comfortable in the areas that I was building products for multiple years to taking on a broader set of challenges where the breadth was equally important as was the depth, and at times I had to go more broader versus deeper in order to make sure that all ends of the business are funded or the needs are understood, right? And then sort of operating with value of being fair and not just gravitating towards what might seem to be your comfort zone or areas that you already know. So I feel like to me that was the biggest learning opportunity to also figure out what is the DNA of a good platform team versus a product team, and how are those things changing and evolving, and whether the context in which I'm operating allows for that change. Is it ripe for that change or disruptive, or there are just too many things that need to happen before we can fix that, right? So it definitely evolved my thinking as a leader, and building understanding and empathy around what different kinds of engineers really need to be successful and how you cannot just treat them all as one. So
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's I think we touched on it that the everything has evolved to include a component of software engineering, and you're seeing all these teams have to evolve and grow. And I've spoken to other leaders of DevOps who are responsible for front end development, and I had the question, which was kind of curious, and I was like, well, why front end development? And they're like, well, we have to build tools around this that work, and it needs a front end. So it's interesting that just that dynamic nature of software engineering has kind of now added all those different skill sets to your plate, and it's kind of helped you grow. And it's a positive challenge, though.
right. And I want to say that also a big part of this is partnering with DevRel engineers because they are our first customers, right? And this whole low code, no code movement is taking over, right? Because the builders of the new world or the creators of the new world do not have to be software engineers as such. They could be data scientists, they could be creators who want to just code enough to get their work done or build their idea into a product. And we have those kind of tool sets available today, and those are growing in popularity and demand. So I think at the end of the day, it's also about how do we achieve that simplicity, even if you're working on something as complex as infrastructure and hardware and vendors and supply chain. How do you present an abstraction to the end user or to the end consumer, who again is probably consuming this through an API and not necessarily going to your portal, and make it simpler for them to do their job, which is like spin up a server, connect it to my cloud deployment, and get my brand new idea in hands of all these customers. And that idea may or may not be related to engineering. It may be a totally different idea, but needs some basic elements of engineering to make it come alive.
Yeah, the complication of the cloud and the API component has just become incredible because, yeah, I mean, just if you, I guess 20 years ago, you could actually do a ton of development on just one computer with all the phases of the application development process, the SDLC on your laptop. That doesn't work anymore, which is amazing because it's gone so fast. I mean, just the teams have also had to evolve so fast, and We have so many nuances and the definitions. I mean, what is a platform engineer? One company is DevOps someplace else. What's DevOps someplace else is really a software engineer of infrastructure. It's all become so, the growth has happened so quickly in the last decade. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And that's why I think while building teams, it's also important to develop that abstraction or the contracts and service ownership, especially when you're a smaller team growing to that phase, right? Because in some of the bigger places, all these things are already nailed down and people are sort of operating with that mindset. But as you evolve, even impact on career ladders becomes very evident, because now you're hiring for these skill sets. You need to provide a career path for each of these skill sets or engineers to grow and be successful. And that has led to some iterations on how we think about our levels and career roles and things like that at the companies, which is some of the work I'm really proud of.
Shweta, I was going to say, it's been great having you on the podcast. A ton of great insights on hiring in general, but especially on niche skill sets. I like to ask guests this question because I always get a great response, and it's great to see what future guests can help with. But if you could ask a future guest of the show to cover a topic, what would you like to hear about?
That's a great question. I think one thing I would like to hear about is sort of a concept that I ponder a lot about is the organizational efficiency quotient. So you have a data-driven way of saying how efficient your engineering is or your product is or your business is, right? And then you hire people with great skill sets who are awesome fits. But then the secret sauce of it all coming together for a organization to hit the idea from idea stage to production and achieve those rapid results is a combination of all of those things, right? How do you measure that, or how do you translate into what differentiates a great company or a great success story, which is obviously full of pains, versus one which is forgettable and doesn't really hit the mark. So I don't think there is any codified metric or way of describing it, but I do think of it as it's not just enough to hire brilliant people. You have to really look into, are they set up for success? What does your culture tell you about, how empowered they are? And if there is a way to measure that, how empowered someone is, I think that would be a great topic.
That's a good one. I like that. I was going to ask you, the other question is, if somebody wants to reach out to you to pick your brain on anything at all that you talked about, what is a good way of reaching out and getting a hold of you?
Yeah, I am on LinkedIn and Twitter. So that, though I'm pretty open and mentor a lot of people as well. So if you have any comments or want to just brainstorm, then my DMs are open.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to include those in the show notes so people can reach out if they do want to follow up with you. Thank you for being on. Thank you for sharing it. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and hopefully we can chat about more topics in the future. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, Shweta's topic was great about talking about organizational efficiency and how do you measure a great company versus a forgettable one, and some of those metrics in there would be really interesting to talk about. Love to have somebody on that maybe has seen both sides of that house and talk about some of those aspects. Also, if the podcast has been useful, if you like it, share it with somebody else. That's how we grow the podcast. And throw a review up on Apple or Google or wherever you listen to this podcast. That is always helpful. That's it for this episode. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.